A millionaire patient pretends to be in a coma, but when he hears his nurse's confession. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. Anna Monroe had been a nurse at Westbridge Private Hospital for almost 2 years. But today, something felt different. She had received an unexpected summons to Dr. Harris's office, the head of neurology. Her heart raced as she walked through the sterile, white halls, wondering if she had done something wrong or if she was being transferred to a different department. She tried to calm herself, but couldn't shake the unease settling in her chest. When she arrived at Dr. Harris's office, she knocked on the door. "Come in," came his calm voice from the other side. She stepped into the room, and Dr. Harris was standing near the window, his gaze fixed on the city skyline. His office smelled of antiseptic and expensive leather, a stark contrast to the clinical environment she was used to. "Anna," he said, finally turning to face her. "We have a patient who requires special care. But I must warn you, this job is not for the faint-hearted." Anna's brows furrowed in confusion. "What kind of patient?" she asked cautiously. Dr. Harris handed her a thick medical file, and her eyes immediately landed on the name on the cover, Grant Carter. The newspaper clipping attached to the file was unmistakable, a horrific car accident that had left the young billionaire in a coma for nearly a year. Grant Carter was a name that had once dominated headlines. He was the ruthless CEO of Carter Enterprises, known for building an empire at just 32. But now, he was nothing more than a shell of a man, trapped in his own body. His family rarely visited, and most of the medical staff simply did their rounds out of obligation. Dr. Harris continued, "Grant needs someone who will truly care for him, someone who will be dedicated. And I believe you are the right person for this task." Anna was taken aback. A man like Grant Carter, who once had everything, wealth, power, respect, was now reduced to this fragile state. The responsibility seemed overwhelming. But despite the doubts swirling in her mind, something in her gut told her she could do it. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Dr. Harris nodded, his face revealing a hint of approval. "Good. Your shift starts tonight." Anna spent the rest of the day preparing for her new role. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew this would be no ordinary case. Later that evening, when she entered Grant's private suite on the top floor of the hospital, she was immediately struck by how luxurious it was. The room was designed to offer comfort and peace, a stark contrast to the clinical environment of the rest of the hospital. In the center of the room lay Grant Carter, his body pale and lifeless, tubes and wires keeping him alive. Anna swallowed hard as she walked closer. Despite the machines, despite the stillness, there was something almost beautiful about him. His broad shoulders, sharp jawline, and dark lashes gave him an air of strength that felt out of place in his current state. She adjusted his foredrip and gently wiped his forehead with a warm cloth. It was a simple task, but the moment her hand touched his skin, a strange sensation ran through her. It was as though he could feel her presence, even in his comatose state. She paused for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. But as she continued her work, she shook off the feeling. It was just the stress of the day, she told herself. Nothing more. The following days became a routine for Anna. Every morning and evening, she bathed Grant, changed his sheets, and monitored his vitals. But she did more than that. She talked to him. She shared stories about her life, her dreams, her fears, and even the small details of her day. She often wondered if he could hear her. If somewhere deep inside, he was still aware of the world around him. The steady beep of the heart monitor, the faint hum of the Ford machine, these sounds became a constant backdrop to her days. But in the midst of it all, there was a growing connection between Anna and Grant. Despite the silence that surrounded them, something was shifting. But she had no idea that this was only the beginning. I can feel the weight of the silence in the room as Anna continued her daily routine. The days had become predictable, and yet there was something different, something that made her question if Grant was truly unaware of her presence. She had been talking to him for weeks now, sharing the little details of her life, her childhood memories, and even her thoughts on the weather. At first, it felt like talking to a wall. But now, there were moments when she felt like he was listening, like his heart monitor beeped in response to her words. Maybe it was just her imagination, but the sensation was undeniable. It kept her coming back. Every evening, after her shift, she would spend time by his bedside, tending to him, holding his hand, and hoping for the miracle that everyone had given up on. But no one could have predicted what happened one night. Anna was wiping his forehead with a damp cloth when she felt it. A slight twitch in his hand, so small it could have been nothing. But Anna froze. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Could Grant really be waking up? She had heard rumors that people in comas could still respond to sound, to touch, but she had never truly believed it until now. She stayed still, watching for any other signs. The steady beep of the heart monitor continued, but there was something more to it, something subtle, a change in the rhythm that she couldn't ignore. Slowly, she placed her hand over his, hoping for another sign. She waited, and waited. It was then that his fingers moved again. This time, there was no mistaking it. His fingers squeezed hers gently, a barely perceptible movement, but enough to send Anna's heart racing. She gasped, her breath catching in her throat. "Grant," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. The room seemed to hold its breath with her. The silence was thick, but this time, it felt different. The sound of the heart monitor was louder, as if it too was aware of what had just happened. For a moment, Anna could hardly believe it. She had waited for so long, hoping for a sign, and now it had come. She leaned in closer, her voice trembling with emotion. "Grant, can you hear me?" she asked softly. His fingers twitched again, and then, as if in response, his eyelids fluttered. Slowly, so slowly, his eyes opened, revealing the deep blue of his gaze. Anna's heart soared. It was real. He was waking up. She looked down at his face, her eyes searching for any recognition, any sign that he knew her. But his expression was blank, confused even, as if he was seeing her for the first time. Who are you?" Grant's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but it was enough to send a thrill through Anna's chest. He remembered nothing. His memories were still locked away, hidden from him, from everyone. Anna swallowed hard, trying to steady her emotions. She wasn't sure what to say, how to explain who she was. "I'm Anna," she said softly. "I've been taking care of you." She could feel the weight of his gaze on her as he tried to piece together his surroundings, his thoughts. "You've been in a coma," she continued. "It's been a long time, but you're awake now. You're going to be okay." Grant blinked, processing her words, but there was still a fog in his eyes, a disconnect that Anna couldn't ignore. He didn't remember anything. Not the accident, not the life he had lived before. Nothing. "A coma," he repeated slowly, as if the word itself was foreign to him. "How long?" Anna hesitated for a moment, the gravity of his question sinking in. "A year," she said quietly. "You've been in a coma for over a year." His brow furrowed as he tried to absorb the information. He had been in a coma for more than a year, and yet, he couldn't remember a single thing about his life. "I don't remember," Grant said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't remember anything." Anna could see the confusion in his eyes, the uncertainty. He wasn't just waking up from a coma. He was waking up to a life that felt completely foreign to him. He was a stranger to himself. And she, Anna, was now his only link to the world he had lost. It was a heavy burden to carry, one she hadn't expected when she agreed to care for him. She had thought it would be just another patient, another job. But this was different. Grant Carter wasn't just any patient. He was a man who had once controlled an empire, a man who had everything, and now, he was starting over. And Anna was the one who would help him rebuild, even if she didn't know where to start. The silence between them stretched on, heavy with the weight of unspoken thoughts. Finally, Grant spoke again. "What happens now?" His voice was calm, but Anna could sense the deep questions beneath it. What happened now that he was awake? What happened to his life? What happened to his family? His empire? Anna took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts that raced through her mind. "Now," she said softly, "now we take it one step at a time." The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Anna felt a sense of purpose. She would help Grant rediscover who he was, help him piece together the life he had lost. And together, they would face the unknown. I could see the confusion in Grant's eyes as he tried to comprehend the reality of his situation. A year. A whole year of his life lost to a coma, a void that he had no memory of. He seemed to be struggling, trying to make sense of what Anna had just told him, as if he couldn't fathom the idea that so much time had passed while he lay unconscious. But he wasn't just confused about the time lost. There was a deeper, more unsettling question lingering in his mind. Who was he now? The man who once ran Carter Enterprises, who had lived a life of luxury and power. Was he still that person, or had he been reduced to nothing more than a stranger to himself? Anna stood by his bedside, watching him process the information. She could feel the weight of the situation, the responsibility of being the first person he truly encountered after waking up. She had hoped this moment would be different. She had imagined it would be full of joy and relief. But instead, it felt more like an uncertain beginning, a fragile moment that could break at any second. After what felt like an eternity, Grant looked up at her, his eyes distant. "I don't know who I am," he said quietly, his voice thick with disbelief. "I don't even remember what I did before. How do I go back to a life I don't even remember?" Anna's heart ached for him. She had only known him as a patient, a man caught in the aftermath of a terrible accident, but even she couldn't deny the fear in his words. What kind of life could he have without the memories that defined him? "We take it one step at a time," Anna said gently, trying to reassure him. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to go back to anything yet. All we need to focus on is your recovery." Grant's gaze flickered toward the window, his eyes narrowing as if searching for something in the world outside. "Recovery," he repeated softly. "But I have no idea how to recover what I lost." His words hit Anna like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just recovering physically from his injuries. He was recovering his very identity. "It's not just about getting better physically, Grant," she said, her voice steady but warm. "It's about finding who you are again. And I'll be here to help you with that, every step of the way." The silence in the room stretched between them as Grant absorbed her words. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since waking up. There was a flicker of something deeper than confusion in his eyes. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his voice tinged with both suspicion and gratitude. Anna hesitated, caught off guard by the question. It wasn't that she hadn't asked herself the same thing before, but now, hearing it from him, it felt more real. She thought about her own life, her own struggles, and how they had led her here. She didn't have an easy answer, but she knew the truth. "Because it's what I do," she said simply. "I help people, and right now, you need someone to help you find your way back." Grant didn't respond right away, but she could see him processing her words, his mind working through the complexities of his situation. She had no idea where this journey would lead them, but she knew one thing for sure. They had both crossed a threshold that neither of them could turn back from. Over the next few days, as Grant began to regain his strength, Anna helped him with small tasks, sitting up, eating, walking. Each small victory was a reminder that recovery, in all its forms, was a long and painful process. But even as he grew physically stronger, his emotional state was more fragile. He was like a man caught between two worlds, the world of the person he used to be and the person he was becoming. "Do you ever feel like you've forgotten who you are?" Grant asked Anna one evening, as they sat together by the window. It had been a question he had asked several times since waking up, and Anna could sense that he was struggling with it, trying to find a way to understand his own identity. She thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes," she said softly, "but I think part of who we are is the journey we take to discover who we can become. It's not about forgetting the past. It's about understanding it and learning how to move forward." Grant turned to her, his eyes studying her face. "You really believe that?" he asked. Anna nodded slowly. "I do. You're not defined by what you've lost. You're defined by what you choose to do next." A long silence followed, and Anna could see Grant processing her words, weighing them against his own experience. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. But then, he looked up at her, a small, uncertain smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I don't know if I can ever be the person I was," he said quietly. "But maybe, just maybe, I can be something better." Anna smiled back, her heart swelling with hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the first time since waking up, Grant had spoken not just of recovery, but of transformation. And that, Anna realized, was the first real sign that he was on his way back to himself. I could see the shift in Grant's demeanor as the days passed. The physical recovery was coming along, but the emotional toll was much heavier. He spent hours lying in bed, staring out of the window at the world beyond, as if searching for answers in the sky. The silence in the room between us had grown comfortable, though it was filled with unspoken words. It was as if he was still figuring out who he was, who he had been, and who he could become. I noticed that he was more distant lately. It was a subtle change, but it was there. His eyes seemed lost in thought, and he barely spoke as much as he used to. I could understand the struggle. Being forced to rediscover yourself after losing everything was a painful process. For someone like Grant, who had built an empire, the idea of having nothing to cling to was overwhelming. One evening, as I was checking his vitals, he suddenly spoke. "Anna, do you think I'll ever remember my life before? The people I knew, the business I ran, the person I was?" His voice was steady, but I could hear the vulnerability beneath the surface. I set the medical chart down and took a deep breath. "I think it's possible," I said carefully. "But you don't have to remember everything right away. It's not about remembering all the details. It's about figuring out who you are now, who you want to be." Grant was silent for a long moment. I could tell he wasn't convinced. "You don't understand," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had everything. Wealth, power, control. And now, I have nothing. I don't know how to start over." I could see the weight of his words, the sadness in his eyes. He was right in one way. He had lost everything. The life he once knew, the empire he built, and the man he had been. They were all gone. But the truth was, he still had something valuable. He still had the chance to rebuild, to redefine himself. I sat down beside him, carefully choosing my words. "Grant, it's not about starting over. It's about starting from where you are now. You still have your mind, your strength, and you have people who care about you. You're not starting from nothing. You're starting with the opportunity to shape the next chapter of your life." He looked at me, his gaze softer now, less guarded. I saw the hint of a flicker of hope in his eyes, a spark that hadn't been there before. "I don't know if I can do it," he admitted. "I don't know if I can be that person again." His voice cracked slightly, and I could feel his frustration and fear. I placed a hand on his, trying to offer some comfort. "You don't have to be that person again. You just have to be you, whoever that is now. And you don't have to figure it all out today. You'll find your way, I promise." The silence between us stretched again, but it felt different this time. It wasn't heavy with doubt, but rather with the quiet possibility of change. Grant leaned back against his pillow, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. For the first time in a while, he didn't look as lost. He looked like someone who was beginning to think about what could come next. Over the next few days, I noticed small changes in him. He started talking more about his past, not in detail, but about the things he remembered. It wasn't the empire-building CEO Grant Carter. It was a different side of him. He talked about his childhood, his family, the simpler things that had made him happy before the world of business consumed him. I saw a glimpse of the man he had been before the weight of success took over. But it wasn't just the past that he was reconnecting with. He was also starting to think about the future. "What do I do now?" he asked me one morning. "I don't even know where to begin. Do I go back to the business? Or do I find something else to do? I'm not even sure I want to go back to that life." I saw the uncertainty in his eyes, but I also saw something else, a willingness to consider something new, something different. "You don't have to rush into anything," I said gently. "You don't have to decide right away. Maybe this is your chance to explore something else, something that brings you peace instead of stress." He looked at me thoughtfully, and for the first time since his awakening, he seemed to consider the possibility of a different life, a life outside the confines of corporate power. As the days passed, we continued to talk, and each conversation seemed to bring him closer to a decision, to the realization that he could build a new life for himself, one that wasn't dictated by the pressures of his former world. But even as Grant was starting to find his footing again, there was something else that kept pulling at him. The truth about the accident that had brought him to this point. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the story, something he was missing. I had noticed the same thing in him. He had become obsessed with the details, trying to piece together what had happened that night. And so, despite his progress, the question lingered. Was the accident really just an accident, or was there something more? I knew it was only a matter of time before Grant started to investigate. And when he did, he would uncover the truth about the events that had led him to this point. But for now, I could only stand by and watch as he continued to rediscover who he was, one step at a time. And as I did, I realized something. This was no longer just about him. It was about both of us. We were both starting over, and together, we would face whatever came next. I could feel the tension in the room building as Grant became more determined to uncover the truth about the accident. It had been weeks since he woke up, and while he was beginning to find a new sense of purpose, there was something still gnawing at him. His mind kept returning to that night. The crash, the unanswered questions, and the deep sense that there was more to the story than he had been told. He wasn't the type of man to leave things unresolved. And so, I knew it was only a matter of time before he took matters into his own hands. The morning after his latest round of questions to me, I arrived at his suite to find him sitting at the desk, surrounded by papers. His computer screen displayed a series of documents, news articles, police reports, and, most strikingly, a photograph of the crash site. The accident had occurred on a dark, rainy night a year ago, but the image still had a vividness to it, almost like it was mocking him with its cold, unyielding truth. I walked into the room, and he didn't even look up at me. His gaze was fixed on the screen, but I could feel his thoughts swirling. "I need to know what happened that night, Anna," he said, his voice steady but filled with an intensity one had not seen before. "I've gone through all of this, and it's not adding up. The police report doesn't match the details in the news articles. Someone's hiding something, and I need to find out what." I could see the resolve in his eyes. It wasn't just the need for answers anymore. It was something deeper. He had to reclaim control over this part of his life, to understand what had been taken from him. I took a step closer, carefully watching his every move. "Grant, you don't have to do this alone," I said quietly, my voice almost a whisper. "We can go through it together. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself." Grant turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and gratitude. "I appreciate that, Anna, but you don't understand. This isn't just about finding out who was responsible for the crash. It's about understanding why this happened. Why did someone go to such lengths to make sure I was out of the picture?" The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the unknown. He was right. This wasn't just about a simple car accident. There was something far more sinister at play. Grant was starting to see it, and now, so was I. "I'll help you," I said, my voice firm. "We'll figure this out together. But remember, this journey is going to be long and difficult. We might uncover things that we're not ready to hear." He nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know," he replied quietly, "but I have to do this. For myself. For everything I've lost." Over the next few days, Grant and I worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragmented details of that night. We contacted the police department, reviewed the reports, and even reached out to witnesses who had seen the aftermath of the crash. Slowly, the picture began to form. It wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a carefully orchestrated plot, one that had been set in motion long before that fateful night. There were inconsistencies in the timeline, gaps in the evidence, and strange details that didn't add up. But the breakthrough came when we discovered a hidden report, one that hadn't been included in the official files. It was a statement from a bystander who had witnessed a car following Grant's vehicle just before the crash. The bystander described a black sedan tailing Grant's car, driving aggressively and swerving dangerously. According to the statement, the driver of the black sedan had been in a hurry, almost as if they were trying to force Grant off the road. "This is it," Grant said, his voice shaking as he stared at the report. "This is what I've been looking for. Someone tried to kill me." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had always known that Grant's accident was more than just an unfortunate event, but hearing the truth out loud was still a shock. Someone had intentionally tried to end his life. And now, we had to find out who and why. But the more we uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. As we dug deeper, we realized that the conspiracy surrounding Grant's accident wasn't just about a random act of violence. It was connected to something much larger, a power struggle within his own family, a battle for control over Carter Enterprises. We had stumbled into a web of lies, betrayal, and corruption that stretched far beyond the accident itself. I could see the toll it was taking on Grant. He had already lost so much, and now, he was being forced to confront the darker side of the world he had once ruled. But he wasn't backing down. With each new piece of information, his resolve grew stronger. He wasn't just trying to recover his memory anymore. He was fighting for his life, for his future, and for the legacy that had been stolen from him. As the days went by, we continued our investigation, and with every lead, we got closer to the truth. But with every step forward, the danger grew. We were playing a dangerous game, and I could feel the pressure mounting. But I also knew that there was no turning back now. Grant was committed to uncovering the full extent of the conspiracy, no matter what it took. And I would be by his side, helping him every step of the way. But as we were about to take the next big step in our search for answers, something unexpected happened. The phone rang. It was a private number, and when I answered, a voice on the other end spoke in a low, gravelly tone. "Stop digging, Anna, or there will be consequences." The voice didn't identify itself, but I knew instantly that it was a warning. And it wasn't just for me, it was for Grant, too. The stakes were higher than ever. And now, we had no choice but to push forward, no matter the cost. I could feel the tension hanging in the air, thick and suffocating, as Grant and I continued our investigation. The warning call had shaken us both, but it also hardened our resolve. Whoever was behind the attempt on Grant's life wasn't going to let us uncover the truth easily. I could see it in Grant's eyes. The fire was burning brighter than ever. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything he had already lost. That night, we stayed up late, poring over more documents, cross-referencing details, and trying to put the pieces together. I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above, the sound of paper shuffling, and the soft clink of the pen as Grant tapped it nervously on the desk. He wasn't saying much, but I could tell he was thinking. "Anna," he finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "We need to go deeper. We've only scratched the surface, and the more we find, the more I realize someone is trying to keep me from remembering what really happened." I nodded, looking at the documents scattered before us. Each new revelation only made the mystery more complex. It wasn't just about a botched accident or a business rivalry. It was personal. There were names, connections, and a trail of lies that stretched back further than either of us had anticipated. "Where do we go from here?" I asked. I had never seen Grant so determined, but there was also a shadow of fear in his eyes. "I think we need to look into the people closest to me. My family, my colleagues. Someone within my inner circle might be involved. But I need to figure out who." His words were like a spark, and I could feel the shift in the room. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was a game of trust and betrayal. We couldn't rule anyone out, not even the people who had been closest to him. The next day, we started reaching out to people from Grant's past, former employees, business partners, even distant relatives. But as we dug deeper, we realized that this was no ordinary conspiracy. This was something far more calculated. We spoke to a former assistant of Grant's, a woman named Rachel, who had been working with him right before the accident. At first, she was hesitant to speak, but after some coaxing, she revealed something unsettling. "Grant," Rachel said, her voice trembling, "there were rumors about your business dealings in the months leading up to the accident. People were starting to ask questions. There were whispers about shady deals, and I think someone in your family was involved. But I don't know who." That was all we needed. A new lead. Someone close to Grant, possibly even in his family, had a motive to silence him. We were getting closer, but it felt like every step forward was followed by 2 steps back. I could see the weight of it all on Grant's shoulders. The idea that someone close to him had betrayed him, and the fact that his own family could be involved in something so sinister. It was hard to fathom. But he wasn't giving up. We kept pushing, digging deeper, and eventually, we uncovered a crucial piece of the puzzle. A hidden financial record linked Grant's company to a series of unapproved transactions. It was a massive sum of money, enough to raise serious questions about embezzlement or worse. The more we followed this trail, the clearer it became. Grant's brother, Nathan, had been managing a significant portion of the company's funds in secret, diverting money for personal gain. The connections were undeniable, and the implications were huge. But there was still one question left unanswered. Why had Nathan gone to such extreme lengths? What was his endgame? I could see Grant's face twist in anger as he processed the new information. "Nathan," he muttered to himself. It had to be him. He always had an agenda, but I never thought he would go this far. The shock in his voice was palpable. It was one thing to suspect betrayal, but it was another to uncover the extent of it. Grant was a man who had spent years building his empire, and now, His own flesh and blood had been plotting behind his back. "I have to confront him," Grant said, his voice sharp with determination. "This ends now." I hesitated, knowing the confrontation with Nathan could unravel everything they had worked for. "Grant, you're not well enough for this yet," I warned him. "You need to be careful. If we go to Nathan now, we have to be sure. We can't make a mistake." But Grant was already moving, his mind set on the confrontation. "I don't care if I'm ready or not. This has gone on long enough. It's time to take back control." I knew there was no stopping him. This was the moment he had been building toward, his chance to reclaim his life, his company, and his future. The next day, we arranged a meeting with Nathan. Grant, looking stronger but still fragile, walked into the room with a sense of purpose. Nathan sat across from him, his usual smug smile faltering when he saw the look in Grant's eyes. The tension in the room was thick, and I could feel the air between them crackling with unsaid words. "I know what you've been doing," Grant said, his voice steady but cutting. "I know about the money you've been hiding, the deals you've been making behind my back, and I know you were involved in the accident. What I don't know is why. Why betray me? Why try to kill me?" Nathan's face remained unreadable for a moment, but the silence spoke volumes. Finally, he broke the stillness, his voice cold and detached. "You were always in the way, Grant. You were never going to let me have what was rightfully mine. I had to do what I did to secure my future. Your legacy was holding me back, and I couldn't let that happen." The words hit Grant like a physical blow. His own brother had plotted against him, not just for money, but for control. This was no longer just about family or business. It was about power, pure and simple. The confrontation had started, but it was only the beginning. We had uncovered the truth, but there were still more questions to answer. The game was far from over. I could feel the tension building in the room as Grant and Nathan sat facing each other. The truth had been exposed, and there was no turning back. Nathan's cold indifference to his actions was like a knife to Grant's heart. For a moment, I thought Grant would explode, but instead, he sat there, his eyes burning with something deeper than anger, something that looked a lot like betrayal. He was still trying to process what Nathan had just admitted. The quiet rage in his voice, when he spoke, broke the silence. "You tried to kill me," Grant said, his voice low but filled, with an intensity that cut through the air. "For what? Power? Money? You took everything from me, my company, my family, my life." Nathan didn't flinch. He merely leaned back in his chair, his hands folded in front of him. His face remained impassive, almost detached from the gravity of the situation. "It was never about killing you," Nathan replied calmly. "It was about taking what was rightfully mine. You were always in the way, Grant. Always the golden child, always the one they loved. But the truth is, you never cared about this company. You cared about your empire, your legacy. I was just a shadow, never acknowledged for the work I did. I wasn't going to wait around for you to hand it over." The words hit Grant like a physical blow, but I could see something change in him, something that resembled a new understanding. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, but now he was seeing his brother for what he truly was, a man willing to sacrifice everything, even his own flesh and blood, for power. "You've been plotting this for years, haven't you?" Grant said, his voice shaking with disbelief. "I thought you were my family. I thought you cared." Nathan's expression remained unchanged. "I cared about what I was owed, what I deserved. I've been patient, Grant, waiting for the right moment. And when you were vulnerable, when you were at your weakest, that was my chance. And I took it." I watched as Grant's face turned pale, his hands clenched into fists. He was struggling to hold himself together, the weight of the betrayal threatening to break him. But he wasn't breaking. He wasn't going to let Nathan have that power over him. The room felt colder as the truth settled between them. Grant's empire was not just a business. It was his identity, his legacy. And now, his brother had torn it apart for the sake of greed. "You never understood, did you?" Grant said, his voice barely a whisper. "This company wasn't just about money or power. It was about building something that would last, something that would help people, change lives. And you wanted it for yourself. You never saw the bigger picture." Nathan finally leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I saw exactly what I wanted to see. And I'm going to take it, Grant. You're not going to stop me. I have everything in place. You're nothing without this company, and you know it." Grant's face hardened, his eyes flashing with something more than anger now, something that resembled defiance. "We'll see about that," he said quietly. Nathan's smug expression faltered for just a moment, but it was enough. He had underestimated Grant's resilience. I could see it in Grant's eyes now. He wasn't the man who had been lying in that hospital bed, broken and vulnerable. He was the man who had built an empire from the ground up, and he wasn't about to let his brother destroy everything he had worked for. Anna, Grant said, turning to me for the first time since the confrontation began. I need your help. We're not done yet. Nathan thinks he's won, but he's wrong. We're going to take this back. I could see the fire in his eyes, and it was contagious. We had uncovered the truth, but it wasn't enough to simply know it. We had to act. The next step was clear. Grant wasn't going to let Nathan walk away with the company. He was going to fight, not just for the business, but for the integrity of everything he had built. But it wasn't just about the company. It was about justice. It was about holding Nathan accountable for what he had done. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew Grant was ready. I had never seen him like this before. Determined, focused, and unyielding. We spent the next few days preparing. Grant worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, contacting lawyers, and strategizing his next move. It was no longer just a family dispute. It was a full-fledged battle for control. And we knew that Nathan wouldn't go down without a fight. The phone rang late one evening, interrupting the quiet of the room. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello, I said, my voice steady. A low, distorted voice came through the line. You're making a big mistake, the voice said, its tone threatening. You can't win this. We have everything under control. My stomach dropped. It was a warning. Someone was watching us, and they weren't going to let us take Nathan down without consequences. Who is this? I demanded, my heart racing. But the line went dead. I looked at Grant, who was sitting across the room, staring intently at the documents in front of him. He hadn't heard the call, but I knew what it meant. We were no longer just fighting against Nathan. We were up against something bigger, an entire network of people who were willing to do whatever it took to protect their secrets. Grant stood up slowly, his expression hardening. This is just the beginning, he said, his voice resolute. They can threaten us all they want, but they won't win. I'm taking this fight all the way. And with that, I knew there was no turning back. Grant had made up his mind. He was going to take on his brother, and he was going to do it with everything he had. I could feel the weight of the threat lingering in the air as Grant and I moved forward with our plans. The call had shaken us, but it hadn't stopped us. If anything, it fueled our determination to take on Nathan and whoever was backing him. Every piece of evidence we uncovered, every document we reviewed, only solidified our resolve. We were up against more than just a betrayal of family. This was about power, control, and the lengths people would go to hold on to them. Over the next few days, Grant and I worked tirelessly. Every moment felt like a race against time. We gathered more evidence, contacted trusted allies, and made sure our steps were calculated. Nathan's grip on the company was slipping, and we knew it was only a matter of time before he would do whatever it took to secure his position. I watched as Grant became more focused, more determined. The man who had once been lost, who had been struggling with his identity, was now coming into his own. But the tension was mounting. Every move we made, every phone call we made, seemed to draw us closer to a confrontation that we weren't fully prepared for. I could see the toll it was taking on Grant. He was no longer just recovering from his accident. He was fighting for his life, for everything he had worked for. But there was a fire in him now, a fire that had been reignited with a single purpose. One evening, as we were going over the final preparations for our next step, Grant turned to me, his face serious. I'm not going to let him win, he said. His voice calm but fierce. Nathan thinks he's already won. He thinks he can just take everything from me, but he's wrong. This is my company, my legacy. I'm not going to let him destroy it. I nodded, understanding the depth of his resolve. We're with you, Grant. We'll make sure he doesn't get away with this. That night, we made our move. We contacted the legal team, arranged meetings with key figures within the company, and prepared to confront Nathan once and for all. The moment of truth had arrived. The next day, we walked into the company headquarters with everything we had. We had the evidence, the legal backing, and the support of those who were loyal to Grant. As we entered Nathan's office, I could feel the tension in the air. He was there, sitting behind his desk, his usual smirk replaced with a cold, calculating look. What is this? Nathan asked, his voice laced with disbelief. You think you can just come in here and take everything back from me? Grant stepped forward, his presence commanding. This isn't your company, Nathan. This is mine. And I'm taking it back. The room was thick with silence as the words hung between them. I could see the shock on Nathan's face, his eyes narrowing as he processed what was happening. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just stared at Grant. But then, his face hardened, and he stood up, his voice cold and sharp. You think you can just walk in here and reclaim what you've lost? You've already lost, Grant. You're nothing without this company. Grant didn't flinch. I'm not nothing, Nathan. I never was. And I'm going to prove it to you. Not just for me, but for everyone who believes in what we've built. Nathan's gaze flickered, and I could see the realization dawning on him. This wasn't just about business. It was personal. He had underestimated Grant, thought he could control him, thought he could destroy him. But Grant was no longer the man who had been caught off guard by the crash. He was a man who had fought to reclaim everything he had lost. Nathan's confidence was beginning to crack. You can't win this, Nathan said, his voice rising. I've already planned everything. The company's mine, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. But Grant wasn't backing down. You're wrong, he said firmly. You can't buy loyalty, Nathan. You can't just destroy everything and think you can walk away unscathed. This is about integrity. This is about doing what's right. And I'm not going to let you take that away from me. The confrontation escalated from there, with Nathan becoming more defensive and frantic. The facade of the powerful, in-control businessman was slipping, and what was left was a man who had overplayed his hand. As Grant and Nathan exchanged heated words, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation building inside me. We were so close. It wasn't just about winning the company back. It was about making sure Nathan was held accountable for what he had done. But even as the battle raged on, I knew there was still one more thing we had to face. The true extent of Nathan's betrayal hadn't fully come to light. We still had to uncover the depths of his plan, and we knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. But Grant was ready. He had fought too hard to let this slip through his fingers now. As the confrontation continued, I saw the shift in Nathan's demeanor. He was no longer the calm, collected man he had been. He was unraveling, and with every word that Grant spoke, the truth about his actions came closer to the surface. You'll regret this, Nathan spat, his voice full of venom. You think you've won, but you haven't. I've got people in high places. People who will back me no matter what. But Grant didn't flinch. You can't buy your way out of this, Nathan. This isn't just about the company. It's about right and wrong. And you've crossed a line. With that, Grant turned, signaling the end of the meeting. He knew it wasn't over yet, but he had made his stand. Nathan's empire was crumbling, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. We were on the cusp of a victory, but we knew the battle was far from over. I could feel the tension in the air as Grant and Nathan's confrontation escalated. Grant stood firm, his eyes locked onto his brother's, unwavering in his resolve. Nathan, on the other hand, was visibly unraveling. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the moves behind the scenes, but now he was exposed, and the walls were closing in on him. You still don't get it, do you, Grant? Nathan sneered, trying to maintain some semblance of authority. I'm the one who should have been in charge. All these years, you took everything from me. But I've built something bigger than you ever imagined. Grant's face remained hard, his jaw clenched with frustration, but there was no fear in his eyes. You built nothing, Nathan, Grant shot back, his voice calm yet cutting. You destroyed everything you could to try to get what you wanted. And now, you're going to lose it all. Because you crossed the line. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. It was clear that Grant had no intention of backing down. He was no longer the man who had been lying in that hospital bed, lost and unsure. This man was determined, unyielding, and ready to fight for everything he had built. The tension in the room was palpable as Nathan clenched his fists, his face reddening with anger. You think you can just come in here and take everything from me? Nathan said, his voice rising. You're nothing but a pawn in this game. You've always been a pawn. The words stung, but Grant didn't flinch. He had heard it all before. The accusations, the manipulation. But he wasn't that man anymore. He was ready to take control of his own fate. I'm done being a pawn, Grant said, his voice steady but filled with determination. And I'm done letting you control me, my company, or my life. The silence between them was deafening. I could feel the weight of the moment, the finality of Grant's words. Nathan had lost. The game was over. Grant turned to face me, his eyes filled with a sense of finality that made my heart race. "It's time," he said, his voice low but resolute. "We take this back, not just for me, but for everyone who believed in what we built." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. We were preparing for the final battle, the moment where everything would come to a head. Grant's legal team was working around the clock, putting together the case against Nathan. The evidence we had gathered was damning, and we knew Nathan wouldn't be able to escape it. But as the days went on, I could feel the pressure mounting. This wasn't just about reclaiming the company anymore. It was about justice, about making sure Nathan paid for what he had done, and about proving that Grant was more than just a product of his past. Grant was a man who had the strength to build again, to rise from the ashes of his former life. One evening, as we sat in Grant's office, reviewing the final details before the big reveal, I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He had been working tirelessly, pushing himself to the limit. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I asked, my voice soft with concern. "This isn't just about the company anymore. It's about everything. Your future." Grant leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on the desk. He looked at me with a quiet intensity. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. "This is my future. This is who I am now. I'm not the man who was stuck in that hospital bed. I'm the man who's going to take control of everything again. I'm not just fighting for my company. I'm fighting for my life." The words were a promise, a vow that Grant had made to himself and to everyone who had stood by him. He was done being a victim. He was going to reclaim his place, no matter the cost. The final confrontation with Nathan was set for the next morning. It was time to expose the truth, to bring everything to light. We were going to make sure Nathan paid for what he had done, for all the lives he had ruined in his quest for power. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The threats had been getting closer, the warnings more direct. Nathan wasn't going to go down without a fight. I sat in the quiet of the office, staring at the documents in front of me, when the phone rang. I picked it up, my heart racing as I heard a familiar voice on the other end. "You think you've won?" Nathan's voice was cold, almost mocking. "You haven't even begun to see what I have planned. You think you're going to expose me? You think you're going to take everything back? You're wrong, Grant. You're going to regret this." The line went dead before I could respond. I looked at Grant, who had been listening from across the room. His expression was unreadable. He had heard the threat, but there was no fear in his eyes. If anything, there was a quiet determination that only fueled his resolve. "Let him try," Grant said, his voice firm. "He can threaten us all he wants, but he's not going to win. This is my fight, and I'm not backing down. We're going to do this, Anna, no matter what." I could see the fire in his eyes, and I knew that there was no turning back now. The battle was about to reach its climax, and there was no room for hesitation. We had come this far, and now, it was time to finish what we had started. I could feel the atmosphere shift as the final day approached, the day that would decide everything. Grant and I had done everything we could, and now, it was time to face the consequences of our actions. The stakes were higher than ever. The evidence was overwhelming, and we knew Nathan wouldn't go down without a fight. But Grant had made it clear, there was no turning back. The battle for control of Carter Enterprises had reached its final phase, and every moment felt like a ticking clock. We spent the night preparing, reviewing the last details before the meeting with Nathan. It wasn't just a business confrontation anymore, it was personal. This was about family, betrayal, and the future of everything Grant had worked for. As we sat in the quiet of Grant's office, the weight of the situation pressed on us. He had already lost so much, his memories, his health, his sense of control. But now, he was fighting not just to reclaim his company, but to rebuild his life. I could see the fire in his eyes, the resolve that had been forged in the aftermath of his accident. He wasn't just fighting for power. He was fighting for the man he wanted to be. "We're not doing this just for the company, Anna," Grant said quietly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We're doing this for the people who believed in me, the people who helped me get back on my feet. This is about standing up for what's right." His words hit me hard. I had seen him struggle, seen him fight to find his place in a world that had been turned upside down. But now, he was more than just a survivor. He was a man on a mission. The morning of the confrontation arrived, and we made our way to the meeting. The company headquarters was buzzing with activity, but there was an underlying tension in the air, as if everyone knew something big was about to happen. We walked into the boardroom, where Nathan was already waiting. His usual smug expression was replaced with something colder, something more calculating. He had been cornered, and he knew it. As soon as Grant stepped into the room, Nathan's eyes narrowed. "I'm not going to let you take everything from me," Nathan said, his voice laced with venom. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you're up against." Grant didn't flinch. He stood tall, his presence commanding. "You've already lost, Nathan," Grant said, his voice unwavering. "The truth is out. It's over." For a moment, there was silence. It wasn't just a battle of words, it was a battle of wills. Nathan had always been the one in control, pulling the strings behind the scenes. But now, it was Grant's turn to take the reins. Nathan stood up, his hands trembling with rage. "You don't understand," he spat, his voice growing louder. "I've built this company from the ground up. I've done everything to make it successful. You were never cut out for this. You don't deserve it." Grant's expression hardened. "You're right, Nathan. I don't deserve this company, but I deserve the chance to rebuild it, to make it something more than just a business, to make it something that matters." The room was thick with tension as the words hung in the air. Nathan was reeling, trying to regain control, but it was clear that he had lost. He had underestimated Grant, thought that the accident would be the end of him. But now, Grant was stronger than ever. "You can't just take it back," Nathan said, his voice trembling with frustration. "It's mine now. I have everything. You're nothing without it." Grant's eyes locked onto Nathan's, and for the first time in their lives, he wasn't looking at his brother with the same sense of kinship or family. He was looking at him with the cold, calculated gaze of a man who had lost everything but had regained what mattered most, his strength. "I don't need this company to prove who I am," Grant said quietly. "I've already proven it. You're right about one thing, though. I'm not the same person I was before. I've learned what really matters. And what matters now is doing what's right, not what's easy." Nathan's face twisted with anger, but there was no stopping it now. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back. The room was silent as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The legal team had prepared everything. Evidence, documents, witnesses. It was all there. Nathan had no escape. As the meeting drew to a close, Grant turned to me, his face hard but filled with resolve. "It's over, Anna," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is just the beginning of the rest of my life." We walked out of the boardroom, the weight of the moment still settling in. Grant had done it. He had fought for everything, and now, he was on the path to rebuild his life. But even as the victory sank in, I knew that the journey wasn't over. The fight for his future had only just begun, and I would be by his side every step of the way. The road ahead would be long, but it would be his road to walk. And together, we would face whatever came next. I could see the weight of the battle lifting off Grant's shoulders as the final blow was struck. Nathan had been exposed, his manipulations brought to light, and the legal and business fallout was inevitable. Grant had reclaimed control over Carter Enterprises, but it wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about taking back his life, piece by piece, and forging a new path forward, one that was no longer tied to the mistakes of the past. The days after the confrontation were filled with meetings, legal procedures, and a wave of media attention. The press had been buzzing, speculating about the downfall of one of the most powerful families in the business world. Grant's name was once again on the front pages, but this time, it was for the right reasons. He wasn't just the millionaire businessman who had it all and lost it all. He was the man who fought back, who rose from the ashes of his past, and who refused to let his brother's betrayal define him. As the days went by, I noticed a subtle shift in Grant. He wasn't just the CEO of Carter Enterprises anymore. He was also finding peace with himself. The man who had once been consumed by the need to build, to control, was now focused on something else, balance. "I've spent so much of my life trying to prove myself," he admitted one evening, as we sat together in his office overlooking the city. "But now, I realize it was never about proving anything to anyone but myself. I lost sight of what really matters." His words struck a chord with me. It wasn't just the business or the empire. It was about living a life that had meaning beyond success, beyond wealth. And Grant was finally starting to understand that. But the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. As Grant began to rebuild, there were still whispers, challenges, and enemies who were not ready to let him go. Nathan, though defeated, was still a looming threat. We knew it was only a matter of time before he tried to strike back. But Grant wasn't the same man he had been before. He wasn't going to make the same mistakes again. "We'll be ready," he said, his voice resolute, the fire in his eyes still burning. "I'm not going to let anyone tear down what we've rebuilt." We began focusing on the future, on the people who had stood by Grant through it all. His loyal employees, the people who had believed in his vision, were now more than just workers. They were partners in the journey ahead. I saw the bond that had been forged in the crucible of adversity. Grant wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a leader, someone who inspired those around him to believe in a better future. As weeks passed, the world slowly began to settle back into a new rhythm. Carter Enterprises was no longer just a company. It was a symbol of resilience, of overcoming the odds. Grant had become a symbol too, not just of success, but of the strength to start over, to rise above betrayal, and to learn from the mistakes of the past. And in all of this, I had witnessed a transformation not just in him, but in myself as well. In helping Grant reclaim his life, I had found my own purpose, my own path. I wasn't just there to support him. I was part of this journey, a journey of growth and discovery for both of us. There were still moments of uncertainty, of doubt, but they were fewer now. We had faced the worst and come out on the other side stronger than we ever could have imagined. And as we stood together, watching the city stretch out before us, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. The future was uncertain, but it was ours to shape. We had learned that even in the darkest of times, there was always a way forward. And with each step, we were building a future that was built on trust, strength, and the courage to overcome anything life threw our way. I could see the changes happening before my eyes. Grant had truly transformed, not just in the business world, but in the way he saw himself, the world, and his place within it. The past months had been a whirlwind, and while there was still work to do, we were finally beginning to feel the weight of everything we had fought for, slowly lifting. The phone calls, the sleepless nights, the constant push to reclaim what had been taken, it was all starting to feel like a distant memory. Yet, the journey ahead was far from over. As Grant had told me, the fight wasn't just about business. It was about rebuilding a life. The first steps toward that were subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else. But I saw them. He was spending more time with the people he cared about, reconnecting with the employees who had stood by him, and most importantly, re-engaging with the community around him. Grant had always been a workaholic, driven by the desire to grow his empire. But now, he was beginning to balance that ambition with something deeper, a sense of fulfillment that came from helping others, not just himself. One evening, as the city lights flickered outside his office window, Grant turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next, Anna," he said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet determination. "I can't just go back to the way things were. The company, yes, but my life, my purpose, has to be about more than just power and control. I want to make a difference, not just in business, but in the world." I could see the sincerity in his eyes. The man who had once been consumed by his need to dominate the corporate world was now thinking beyond profit margins and boardrooms. He was looking at the bigger picture. "I think you're already doing that," I replied softly. "You've shown people that it's possible to rise up from failure, to reclaim what's yours, and to stand up for what's right. You're a symbol of resilience." Grant smiled faintly. "That's not enough," he said. "I want to build something that lasts, a legacy that isn't just about wealth, but about making the world a better place. I want to be remembered for the difference I made, not just the money I made." His words struck a chord with me, and I knew in that moment that he had finally found his true purpose. He wasn't the man who had been defined by the riches he had acquired. He was the man who would be defined by the impact he had on others, by the lives he changed. Over the next few weeks, we began to implement changes, both in the company and in Grant's personal life. He started initiatives focused on giving back to the community, charity programs, sustainability projects, and a commitment to fair business practices. But there was also a focus on mentorship, on helping others who were facing the same struggles he once did. He opened the doors of Carter Enterprises to those who had potential but lacked opportunity, offering internships, scholarships, and career guidance to people who had been overlooked by the system. It wasn't just about rebuilding the company. It was about rebuilding the way business was done. I watched as Grant immersed himself in this new vision, the spark of passion driving him forward. He was making a difference, not just by what he said, but by what he did. He was giving people hope, showing them that success wasn't just about money. It was about the difference you made in the lives of others. The more we worked together, the more I saw the depth of his transformation. It wasn't easy, of course. There were still challenges ahead. People who resented Grant's newfound focus, enemies from his past who wanted to drag him back into the cutthroat world of corporate warfare. But Grant wasn't going back. He had found a new purpose, and nothing was going to stop him from fulfilling it. One night, as we sat together after a long day of meetings, I could see the weight of it all in his eyes. But there was something else there too, a sense of peace, a quiet confidence that came from knowing he was on the right path. I've spent my life building a legacy, he said, his voice calm. But now, I'm building something that will outlast me, something that will matter. I smiled, knowing exactly what he meant. Grant wasn't just building a business. He was building a future that would continue long after he was gone. It was a future that was about more than just success. It was about creating a positive impact, leaving the world a better place than he had found it. And as we moved forward, I realized something. I wasn't just along for the ride. I was part of this new chapter too. I had helped him reclaim what he had lost, but now, I was helping him build something that would truly make a difference. The journey wasn't over yet, and there would still be challenges ahead. But I knew, without a doubt, that Grant had found his true calling. And together, we would face whatever came next, side by side, determined to make the most of the future we were creating. I could sense a new energy in the air as the weeks went by. Grant had transformed before my eyes, his vision of the future becoming clearer with each passing day. The challenges had been enormous, and the price of success had been steep, but he was no longer just fighting for himself. He was fighting for the greater good, for the people who had stood by him, for the legacy he was determined to leave behind. The next phase of his journey was about more than just business. It was about his personal redemption and the mission he had set for himself, to rebuild not just the company, but the trust of everyone he had let down. And the hardest part was, for the first time, admitting the full extent of his mistakes. We were sitting together in his office one evening, reviewing the latest community outreach initiatives when he paused, staring at the city skyline outside the window. His face was contemplative, the weight of his thoughts more apparent than ever. I used to think success was about being on top, about having everything. But now I see that I've spent so much of my life climbing a ladder that wasn't even the right one, he said quietly, the words hanging in the air between us. I could tell this was a turning point for him. It wasn't just the business success anymore. He had realized that personal growth and the ability to learn from the past were just as important. I lost myself for a long time, Grant continued, his voice soft but strong. I sacrificed relationships, trust, and sometimes even my integrity just to get ahead. I thought the end justified the means. But now, I know that the journey is more important than the destination. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I watched him. Grant had spent so much time being defined by his wealth and power, but now he was redefining himself by his actions, by his character. He was looking forward to a future where success wasn't measured by the size of his company, but by the difference he made in the lives of others. You're already making a difference, I said after a pause. Look at what you've accomplished. You've already rebuilt the company, but you're also building something far more important: trust, compassion, and a culture that values people over profit. Grant smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. It's just a start. I want to leave something behind that means more than just a financial legacy. I want to leave a mark on people's lives, show them that there's a better way to succeed, a way that doesn't involve hurting others to get to the top. As the days passed, I saw Grant begin to implement his new vision more and more. He became more involved in local charitable organizations, setting up mentorship programs for young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds, and focusing on sustainability in the company's operations. His leadership style evolved, and he began to place greater emphasis on collaboration rather than competition. But it wasn't just the business side that was changing. Grant's personal life began to shift as well. He was more present, more aware of the people around him, and more in touch with the needs of those who had always supported him. There were still challenges, of course. Nathan, though defeated in the business world, was not easily silenced. The whispers about Grant's rise to the top continued, and some of the people in his inner circle remained skeptical of his transformation. But Grant didn't let it bother him. He had been through too much to turn back now. One afternoon, as we sat in a meeting discussing upcoming projects, Grant's phone rang. I could see the tension in his expression as he looked at the caller ID. It was a private number, and something told him it wasn't good news. He answered, his voice calm but firm. Hello. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but I could see the change in Grant's demeanor. He hung up the phone and looked at me, his eyes hardening with determination. That was Nathan's lawyer, he said. They're trying to pull some last-ditch legal stunt to undermine what we've built. They're claiming that I took control of the company illegally, that my leadership is a fraud. They want to drag me back into the courtrooms. I could see the frustration in his face, but also a sense of resolve. He wasn't going to let Nathan's last move take away the peace he had fought so hard for. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice steady despite the concern growing inside me. Fight back, Grant said simply. This is my life now. I'm not letting anyone tear it apart. We've come too far to stop now. I'll fight this with everything I've got, not just for the company, but for everything I've rebuilt. The legal battle that followed was brutal, stretching on for months, but Grant never wavered. He stood firm in his belief that what he had done was right. The evidence was on his side. The support of the board and employees was solid, and his vision for the future was stronger than ever. Through every court appearance, every legal challenge, Grant maintained his focus. He wasn't just defending himself. He was defending the integrity of everything he had worked for. As the trial came to a close, Grant received the news that Nathan's case had been dismissed. It was a victory, not just in the courtroom, but in the larger fight for his future. Nathan had been exposed, and his attempts to tear Grant down had failed. Grant had not only reclaimed his business, but he had also reclaimed his life. The final chapter of the legal battle marked the beginning of a new era for Carter Enterprises. But more importantly, it was the beginning of Grant's new life, one that was no longer defined by the need to win at all costs, but by the commitment to making a lasting, positive difference. As I watched Grant stand tall in the face of everything he had overcome, I knew this was just the beginning. The man I had seen struggle, doubt, and fight for so long was finally living the life he had always deserved. And together, we were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that this time, the future was truly in our hands. I could feel the weight lifting from Grant's shoulders as the finality of the legal battle set in. The dismissal of Nathan's case was a victory not just in the courtroom, but in the broader fight for Grant's future. For months, we had been living on the edge, fighting against a tide of challenges that threatened to tear everything down. But now, there was a sense of calm, a newfound stability that Grant had been desperately seeking for so long. But as Grant stood there, receiving the confirmation that he had won, there was no celebration, no moment of triumph. Instead, there was a quiet reflection in his eyes. This victory, while significant, was just another step in a long journey. His transformation wasn't complete, not yet. It's over, he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. But it's only the beginning. The truth in his words resonated deeply with me. Grant had fought hard for everything he had, but it wasn't just about reclaiming his company anymore. He had learned, slowly but surely, that true success wasn't about wealth or power. It was about the kind of person you became along the way. We both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a road that was his to walk, on his own terms. With the legal battle behind us, we turned our focus back to Carter Enterprises. The company was in a place of recovery, but it still needed guidance, leadership that could set it on the right path and ensure that it thrived without the shadow of betrayal hanging over it. Grant was ready for this. He wasn't the same man who had once ruled with an iron fist, obsessed with control. He was someone new, someone who understood the importance of nurturing his relationships, both within the company and in his personal life. He began making strides toward a healthier work environment, emphasizing transparency, trust, and, most of all, compassion. But as he continued to reshape the company, I noticed another shift in him. He was opening up more, not just to me, but to others as well. The walls he had built around himself were slowly crumbling, and in their place was a man who had found a new purpose in life. He spent more time with the people who had stood by him through the darkest days, the employees who had never abandoned him, even when things seemed hopeless. They were more than just workers to him now. They were partners, and he made sure they knew it. His mentorship programs took off, giving young, aspiring entrepreneurs the tools they needed to succeed. He even started initiatives to help the community, particularly in areas where the company's actions had once harmed. These weren't just empty gestures. Grant was fully invested in making the world a better place, one small step at a time. As the weeks went on, I saw him grow not just as a businessman, but as a person. The old Grant, the one driven by fear and a need to prove himself, was gone. In his place stood someone who had found balance, someone who could see beyond the bottom line and focus on the bigger picture. But with all this change, there were still moments when the weight of his past would creep back in. The shadows of Nathan's betrayal still lingered, and there were moments of doubt, moments when Grant questioned if he was truly worthy of the peace he had fought so hard for. Those moments were few and far between, but they were real. And when they came, I was there to remind him of how far he had come. You've already won, Grant, I would say. You've rebuilt everything. Not just the company, but your life. You're exactly where you need to be. One evening, as we sat together in his office, the quiet of the night settling over us, Grant turned to me, his eyes filled with something that had been missing for so long: peace. I don't think I've ever been this content in my life, he said, his voice calm and sincere. I spent so many years chasing the wrong things. I've made mistakes, but I've learned from them. And now, I'm building something that matters, something that will last. I could see it in him, the peace that comes with knowing that you're on the right path. Grant had finally found his purpose, and it wasn't tied to the empire he had once ruled. It was about the people he had helped, the lives he had changed, and the legacy he was building, not of wealth, but of impact. That night, as we walked through the quiet halls of Carter Enterprises, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Not just in what Grant had accomplished, but in who he had become. He wasn't the same man who had once stood at the helm of a corporation, obsessed with success. He was someone who had found balance, someone who understood that success didn't mean anything if it came at the expense of the things that truly mattered. And as we moved forward, I knew that we were both ready to face whatever came next. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But now, Grant was not just equipped with the tools of a businessman. He had the wisdom, the strength, and the heart of someone who had learned what it truly meant to lead. The future was still uncertain, but it was ours to shape. And together, we would continue to build a life and a legacy that we could both be proud of. I could feel the weight of the journey lift as Grant and I stood together, looking out at the horizon. The trials and tribulations we had faced, the struggles and losses, seemed to fade into the background as the future stretched out before us. But even as we looked forward, there was still a sense of reflection in the air. The business, the personal battles, the legal fight, and the rebuilding, it was all coming together. Yet, there was something more to it now. The company wasn't just a machine for making money anymore. It had become a vehicle for real change, something that could influence lives in ways we hadn't thought possible at the start. The room around us was filled with new energy, staff who believed in Grant, new hires who were eager to help carry the mission forward. Grant's transformation was evident not just in his leadership, but in the way he had cultivated a culture of respect, understanding, and transparency. He was no longer the man driven by the desire to control everything. He was the man who wanted to empower others, help them see their own potential. As the weeks rolled on, Grant and I had many late-night talks. He began to open up more, revealing pieces of his past that he had never shared with anyone. It wasn't just about the company or his legacy anymore. It was about understanding who he was beyond the success, the mistakes, and the lessons learned. I used to think the only way to be happy was by achieving more, winning more, and accumulating more. He confessed one night as we sat together, the quiet hum of the city outside our window. But now, I realize that happiness isn't something you find at the top of a mountain. It's something you find along the way, in the people you meet, in the lives you touch, and in the way you live each day. Those words hung in the air as I processed them. It was clear that Grant had evolved, not just as a businessman, but as a person. He had found peace, not in the pursuit of more, but in the acceptance of what he had. In his journey to rebuild, he had finally understood that success didn't have to come at the expense of happiness, that life was more than just accomplishments and accolades. It was about the people around you and the difference you could make. I had always known that Grant had potential, but now, I saw something even more valuable in him. A depth of character that went far beyond his business acumen. He had begun to understand the true meaning of leadership, not to control, but to inspire. The company, Carter Enterprises, was thriving in ways it never had before. But more importantly, Grant was thriving. He wasn't just the man who had once been so focused on the corporate game that he had lost touch with what mattered. He was a man who had found balance, and the ripple effects of that were felt throughout the organization. As we sat together one evening, discussing future plans, Grant spoke with a clarity I had never heard before. "I'm not going to stop," he said, his voice unwavering. "We've built something great, but there's still more to do. I have a responsibility, not just to this company, but to everyone who's trusted me. This is more than just about business anymore. It's about making sure the next generation has the tools they need to succeed. It's about creating a legacy that's built on integrity, not just profits." His words were a promise to continue building, not just for himself, but for the people who would come after him. And I knew, without a doubt, that he was serious. Grant had gone from a man obsessed with control to a leader who understood that true power came from uplifting others. And I was proud to stand by him, proud to be part of the mission we had started together. The months continued to fly by, each one bringing new challenges and new triumphs. We faced external pressures, as any successful company does, but there was an unspoken understanding that no matter what happened, we were in this together. The employees, the community, and those who had supported Grant, they had all become a part of something larger than just business. As Carter Enterprises continued to grow, so did Grant's influence. But unlike before, he no longer saw this influence as something to wield over others. He saw it as a responsibility to teach, to give back, and to be a guiding light for others who were struggling to find their own path. "I can't change the past," he told me one day as we were walking through the halls of the company. "But I can change how I move forward. I can shape the future. And that's what I'm going to do." I watched him, seeing the quiet confidence in his eyes, knowing that this was the man who had emerged from the ashes of his own mistakes. The man who had found his purpose, who had discovered that true leadership wasn't about being at the top. It was about lifting others up. And as we faced the future, hand in hand, I knew that whatever came next, Grant was ready. We were ready. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, we were both certain that we were on the right path. Together, we would face whatever obstacles lay ahead, knowing that our journey was far from over, but it was a journey worth taking. I could see the momentum building as we moved further into the future. With every passing day, Grant's vision for Carter Enterprises grew clearer, more defined. The lessons he had learned in the harshest of ways were now shaping the company into something far more meaningful than it had ever been. It was no longer just a business. It was a reflection of everything he had gone through, every struggle he had faced, and the person he had become in the process. His leadership wasn't just about making decisions anymore. It was about inspiring others to do the same, to believe in something bigger than themselves. There was a new energy within the company, a sense of purpose that permeated every department. Employees felt it. The community felt it. And most importantly, Grant felt it. He was no longer trying to prove his worth or fight for control. He had reclaimed his place, not just as a CEO, but as a leader who cared about the future. As we sat together in his office one afternoon, reviewing the latest quarterly reports, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The financials were solid, but that wasn't what impressed me the most. It was the changes he had made, both to the company's culture and to his own life, that were making the real difference. "It's not enough to just fix the business," Grant said, his eyes focused on the papers in front of him, but his mind clearly elsewhere. "I need to make sure we're doing things the right way. I've spent so long building an empire that I lost sight of what really matters, people." His words were a quiet reminder of how far he had come. The man who had once been driven by the need to conquer and control had evolved into someone who truly understood the importance of people, his employees, his community, his partners. He was no longer building to maintain power. He was building to create something that would outlast him. We had come a long way from the early days of his recovery. The pain of betrayal, the uncertainty of his future, had all been necessary stepping stones to the person he was becoming. It was clear to me now that his journey was far more about personal growth than any business success could ever be. He had learned to value the right things, to prioritize what was truly important. But just as things were settling, the challenges didn't stop. The corporate world had a way of keeping you on edge, and even though Grant had proven his resilience, the reality was that there would always be forces trying to undermine his success. Nathan was still out there, nursing his wounds and looking for a way to reclaim what he had lost. We both knew that Nathan wouldn't rest until he had his revenge. The threat wasn't gone. It had just shifted into something more subtle. One morning, after Grant had finished a call with his legal team, he sat back in his chair, staring at the skyline outside the window. "He's still out there," Grant said, his voice calm but with an edge to it. "I know it. He won't give up. And neither will I." It was a stark reminder that no victory was ever permanent, especially in the cutthroat world they had both been a part of. But even as the shadow of Nathan loomed, there was a newfound strength in Grant. He was ready for whatever would come next. "I won't make the same mistakes again," Grant said, his words firm. "I've learned to stay ahead of the game, to anticipate the moves people will make before they even realize it. I'm not just fighting for my company anymore. I'm fighting for the people who've supported me, for the life I've rebuilt." The determination in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. Grant had grown in ways that I never thought possible. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a strategist now, someone who knew that life wasn't just about weathering the storm, but about learning how to control the elements. The next few months were filled with intense meetings, strategic decisions, and small victories. Every time we thought we had reached a safe place, something would come up, some new challenge that tested Grant's resolve. But with every obstacle, I saw him grow stronger. And the more he embraced his new purpose, the more the company reflected that growth. Carter Enterprises was thriving, not just financially, but in the way it operated. It had become a company that valued transparency, collaboration, and integrity. The ripple effects of Grant's transformation were being felt far beyond the boardroom. We began seeing partnerships form that would have been unimaginable a year ago. People trusted Grant now, not because of his wealth, but because of who he had become. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about building a legacy. As we continued to push forward, the world seemed to open up with new possibilities. No longer weighed down by the past, Grant was ready to take on challenges that once would have seemed impossible. He had a new vision, one that wasn't limited by the mistakes of yesterday. He was building something lasting, something that would impact generations. But as we moved forward, we both knew that the real work wasn't in business alone. It was in maintaining the balance he had finally found. In a world where everything was constantly changing, finding that balance had become the true measure of success. And as we walked into the future together, side by side, I knew that no matter what came next, Grant was ready. We were both ready. The future, once uncertain and fraught with challenges, now seemed full of possibility. The journey wasn't over, but we had come far, and there was no limit to how far we could go together. I could see the change in the air as the months passed. Carter Enterprises had truly transformed into something new, something that reflected the vision Grant had fought for all this time. The company was thriving, not just because of the financial success, but because of the people it inspired. The culture Grant had built was one of transparency, fairness, and a commitment to giving back. It wasn't just about making profits anymore. It was about making a difference. And yet, despite all the progress we had made, I could feel a tension building inside Grant. He had spent so long rebuilding everything, fighting through every obstacle that had come his way, but there was still an unease in him, a feeling like something was missing. One evening, as we sat in his office overlooking the city, I could see the quiet storm in his eyes. "I've accomplished so much," he said slowly, almost to himself. "But there's still something inside me that's unsettled." I watched him closely, knowing how far he had come. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. "You've rebuilt your company, you've built a legacy, and you've shown the world what kind of leader you've become." Grant leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. "I know, but somewhere along the way, I lost touch with what I wanted. I was so focused on fixing everything, on proving I could overcome the past, that I forgot about the things that really matter. I didn't think about what I actually wanted for myself, not just the company, but my life." The realization hit me hard. Grant had spent so much time focusing on external achievements, on rebuilding the empire, on proving that he could reclaim everything he had lost. But he hadn't stopped to ask himself what truly made him happy, what he wanted from life beyond the boardroom. It was as if, in all the chaos of fighting to get back on top, he had forgotten to take a step back and appreciate the simpler, quieter moments of life. "Grant," I said gently, reaching across the desk to place my hand on his. "It's okay to pause, to take a breath. You don't have to be everything to everyone all the time. You've done incredible things. But now, it's time to focus on you." He nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to the view outside the window, his mind clearly processing my words. I could tell it wasn't easy for him. He had always been someone who thrived on achievement, on success, and now that he had it all, it felt like something was still missing. We spent the next few days discussing what came next. What did he really want? What were his dreams, beyond the business, beyond the responsibilities? And it wasn't an easy conversation. But slowly, we uncovered something that had been buried deep beneath the surface for so long. Grant realized that his life couldn't just be about work, about the company. It had to be about connection, about relationships, and about finding the balance between career and personal fulfillment. He began to prioritize his family and his friendships, reconnecting with people he had neglected during his rise to the top. He spent more time with those he loved, rebuilding relationships that had fallen by the wayside. The shift wasn't instant, but it was profound. It was clear that Grant was learning to take time for himself, to appreciate the small moments, and to let go of the constant pressure to be perfect. As the months passed, the company continued to thrive, but Grant's focus had shifted. He was still the leader of Carter Enterprises, but he was also learning to be the person he had always wanted to be, the person who could enjoy life beyond work, who could make time for his passions, and who could give back to the world in ways that were meaningful to him. One afternoon, as we sat in his office discussing a new partnership, Grant turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You were right," he said. "I've spent so much time focused on building something big that I forgot to build something meaningful. But now, I see that the two can go hand in hand. The success of Carter Enterprises is important, but the kind of person I am and the life I lead are just as important." There was a peace in his voice that hadn't been there before, a quiet understanding that success was more than just money or power. It was about creating a life that was rich in experiences, relationships, and personal growth. "What's next for you?" I asked, curious to know where his journey would take him now that he had found this new sense of balance. Grant smiled softly, his eyes filled with a sense of contentment that I hadn't seen before. "What's next is living fully," he said. "It's continuing to lead Carter Enterprises with integrity, but also making time for the people I care about. It's about traveling, exploring, and enjoying the world I've worked so hard to create. And it's about never losing sight of what really matters." It was clear to me that Grant had finally reached a place where he was at peace with himself. The man who had once been consumed by the need to achieve was now focused on what was truly important. He had built a life that mattered, not just in terms of business, but in terms of personal fulfillment. And as we looked ahead to the future, I knew that whatever came next, Grant was ready. We were both ready. The road ahead would have its challenges, but with the lessons he had learned, the strength he had gained, and the balance he had found, there was nothing that could stop him now. Together, we were ready to face whatever life had to offer, knowing that the future was ours to shape. I could sense the calm that had settled in Grant, but I also knew that peace doesn't always come without a price. The changes he had made to himself, to Carter Enterprises, and to his life weren't the end of the journey. They were part of a larger transformation that was still unfolding. But as we sat together, discussing the next steps for both the company and his personal life, there was a growing sense of clarity. The challenges that once seemed insurmountable now felt like distant memories. We were both living proof that it was possible to start over, rebuild, and grow. Carter Enterprises had grown to be more than a business. It was a living testament to the changes Grant had embraced. There was something deeper now, a sense of community, a sense of purpose in the work we did. Employees felt more empowered, more inspired to contribute to something that wasn't just about making money but about creating a meaningful impact. The balance Grant had struck between his personal life and his professional life was something most people only dreamed of. He had learned to prioritize, to say no when necessary, and to live a life that was filled with intention. And as I watched him, I couldn't help but feel proud of how far he had come. But even with all the success and growth, there was still a lingering question that I could see on Grant's mind, a question that had followed him since his early days of recovery. What's next? What did it all mean? Grant had fought for his company, his life, and his future, but there was still something he was seeking. And I could see that he was now ready to face the next chapter, whatever that might be. One night, as we sat in his office after a long day, he turned to me with a serious look on his face. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, his voice low but filled with purpose. "I've made so many changes in my life, in my company, but I think it's time to do something even bigger, something that truly leaves a mark, not just in business, but in the world. I want to make a real difference, not just for myself or Carter Enterprises, but for the future." His words hit me like a lightning bolt. I had seen Grant go through so much, his rise and fall, his recovery, his transformation, but now, he was talking about something far more ambitious than anything we had discussed before. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Grant leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the same drive that had always been there, but now it was tempered with wisdom. "I've spent so many years building a business, but I'm realizing that I can do more with the platform I've created. It's not just about making money. It's about creating change, real, lasting change. I want to help people who are where I was, lost, uncertain, without direction. I want to use what I've learned to help others build something better, to help them avoid the mistakes I made." His voice had a quiet intensity to it now, and I could tell that this was no passing thought. It was a conviction, a new purpose that he had found. For so long, Grant had been focused on rebuilding his empire, but now, he was thinking about how he could use his resources to impact the world in ways that would go beyond business. "You've already done so much, Grant," I said, my voice full of admiration. "You've built an incredible company. You've changed lives within your organization. But I see what you're saying. You want to build a legacy that isn't just about success. It's about significance." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Exactly. I've been so focused on climbing the ladder, on proving myself, that I lost sight of what it really means to be fulfilled. Now, I want to use everything I've gained, not just for profit, but to help others find their own success, their own fulfillment. I've realized that I can't keep all of this to myself. I have to share it." This was the Grant I had been waiting to see, the one who no longer saw success as a destination but as a journey, a responsibility to others. It was the same Grant who had rebuilt his company, but now, he was looking at the bigger picture, the world outside of Carter Enterprises. "What do you want to do?" I asked, excited to hear more about this new chapter. He smiled, a sense of peace in his eyes. "I want to start a foundation, something that helps young people who are struggling to find their way, people who need guidance, mentorship, and the tools to build their own future. I want to give back in a way that's meaningful. I've been blessed with a second chance at life, and I want to make sure others get that chance too." The idea was big, and it was bold, but it was also exactly what Grant needed. He had found peace in his personal life, in his work, and now, he was ready to give back in a way that would change lives. The next few months were spent laying the groundwork for his new initiative. The foundation would focus on mentorship programs for underprivileged youth, entrepreneurship scholarships, and providing the resources for people to pursue their dreams, no matter their background. It wasn't just about financial help. It was about empowering others with the tools and knowledge they needed to succeed. I watched Grant pour his heart into the project, seeing the fire in his eyes as he worked to make it a reality. Carter Enterprises continued to thrive, but now, it was clear that Grant's focus had shifted. It wasn't just about business. It was about making a lasting impact. And as we prepared to launch the foundation, I knew that this was the next step in his evolution. Grant had already changed his own life. Now, he was ready to help change the lives of others. It was a new beginning, and I was honored to be part of it. I watched as Grant's vision for his foundation began to take shape. It wasn't just an idea anymore. It was becoming a reality, and with it, his life was once again taking on a new direction. The foundation had already started to make waves in the community, providing mentorship and scholarships for underprivileged youth, and creating opportunities for people to build careers they never thought possible. But even as he threw himself into this new venture, there were moments of doubt that crept in. After everything he had been through, It was understandable. It had been a long road. Losing everything, rebuilding, and then discovering his true calling. There were still days when he questioned if he was doing enough, if the foundation was making the kind of impact he had dreamed of. But every time those doubts appeared, I reminded him of how far he had come. This wasn't just about what was immediately in front of him. It was about the legacy he was building, the change he was making in the world, and the lives he was touching. One afternoon, after an event where he spoke about the foundation's mission, Grant sat back in his office chair, a thoughtful look on his face. "I've been doing this for a while now," he said, his voice quiet. "But I still can't shake this feeling that something's missing." I could tell this was different from the earlier struggles he'd faced, the ones where he doubted his ability to succeed. This was something deeper, more introspective. It wasn't about success or failure anymore. It was about meaning. "What do you feel is missing?" I asked, genuinely curious, wanting to help him sort through whatever was on his mind. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "I don't know," he replied. "I've built a foundation. I've rebuilt the company. I've made a difference in people's lives. But I still feel like there's something more I'm meant to do. I want to reach more people, impact more lives, but I feel like I'm hitting a wall." I could see that the restlessness he was feeling wasn't about the scale of his current success. It was about pushing boundaries, doing something that would truly change the course of people's futures in a lasting way. This wasn't just about charity or donations. It was about creating a movement. "Maybe it's not about doing more," I said, trying to offer perspective. "Maybe it's about deepening what you're already doing. Expanding, yes, but in a way that stays true to your values and what you've already built." Grant looked at me, his eyes focusing. "Expand?" he repeated, more to himself than to me. "How do you mean?" I smiled. "The world doesn't just need more initiatives. It needs more people who truly care about making a difference in a sustainable way. You've already created something impactful, but maybe it's time to think about taking it to the next level. Partner with like-minded organizations, build strategic collaborations that allow you to do more with what you have. Get others on board. Inspire them to contribute to the cause you care about. You're already a leader in your own right, Grant. It's time to inspire others to lead too." The idea seemed to resonate with him. Over the next few months, Grant took action on this new vision. The foundation began partnering with schools, nonprofits, and businesses to create programs that offered not only financial support, but mentorship and long-term career development for those who needed it most. It wasn't just about handing out resources. It was about providing the tools for sustainable growth. And, as he always did, Grant threw himself into it completely. But there was one thing I could see him struggling with. The question of his place in all of this. The person he had been. The CEO, the empire builder, the man who had once felt invincible, had changed. He was now building a legacy. But the path to that legacy felt uncertain, undefined. "I feel like I'm at a crossroads," he admitted one day, after a particularly frustrating board meeting. "I'm doing this, but I still don't know where I fit into it all. I've put so much into this foundation, but who am I really now? Am I just a businessman who decided to do good, or is this my real calling?" It was clear that Grant was searching for something deeper than just success. His role in the world was no longer just about business. It was about his identity, his place in the story he was creating. The road had shifted for him, but it was still one that felt uncertain, filled with questions. I knew that the journey to finding fulfillment was never linear. And for Grant, it was about more than just finding the right way to give back. It was about rediscovering who he was outside of the corporate world, outside of the man who had once been driven solely by ambition. "You're doing exactly what you should be doing," I told him one night, as he stared into the distance, lost in thought. "You're using your experiences, your past, your journey to shape the future. It's not about knowing your exact place, Grant. It's about embracing the process and trusting that the path will unfold." It was a simple thought, but it gave Grant the clarity he needed. He had already taken the first steps toward changing the world, but now it was about continuing that work without the pressure to have everything figured out. He didn't have to know exactly where he fit. It was enough that he was making a difference, that he was leading with purpose and compassion. As time passed, Grant's foundation continued to flourish, reaching more people and creating lasting change. His new way of thinking didn't just help the communities he worked with, it helped him too. He learned that leadership wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about being authentic and staying true to the vision of a better tomorrow. Together, we faced the challenges ahead, knowing that even though we didn't have all the answers, we were building something that mattered, something that would stand the test of time. As the months passed, Grant continued to settle into his new life, not just as a businessman, but as a person who had truly found his purpose. The foundation flourished, and the impact it had on countless lives became undeniable. But even beyond that, it wasn't just the external success that mattered. It was the internal peace Grant had worked so hard to find. He had faced down his demons, his past, and the obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. He had rebuilt his life, his company, and his sense of self, and now, he was using all of that to leave a lasting impact. But through it all, there was something more profound happening. It wasn't just about what Grant had achieved. It was about who he had become. He wasn't the man who had once defined himself by power, control, or success. He had learned that true leadership wasn't about being at the top. It was about lifting others up and using the power you have to make a difference. I saw it in the way he interacted with the employees at Carter Enterprises, in the way he took time to mentor young entrepreneurs through his foundation, and in the quiet moments when he reflected on the life he had built. He had finally understood that a legacy wasn't something you left behind after you were gone. It was something you created every single day, with every decision you made, with every action you took. And I knew that, for Grant, the future wasn't about what he had left to accomplish. It was about the lives he had already changed and the people he had already inspired. We had come a long way from the days when Grant had been at rock bottom, unsure of where his life was headed. He had once been defined by the mistakes he had made, by the losses he had endured, and by the power struggles he had fought. But now, he had found something deeper. He had found peace. And that peace wasn't just about finding balance between his personal and professional life. It was about embracing the journey, every twist and turn, and recognizing that success wasn't just about the destination. The company continued to thrive, but it was clear that the most important thing was not how much money was made or how many deals were struck. The most important thing was the culture that had been created, one that valued people, integrity, and long-term impact over short-term gain. That was the foundation of Grant's legacy. And as we looked toward the future, I could feel the quiet confidence that had replaced the man he had once been. Grant was no longer chasing something. He wasn't running after success. Instead, he was focused on nurturing what he had, growing it, and making sure it continued to have a positive impact. The foundation he had built wasn't just about helping people escape the struggles he had faced. It was about showing them how to rise above them. It was about empowering others to take control of their own lives and futures. And with every step he took, Grant was helping to create a future that was better than the one he had inherited. Together, we had made it through so much. There were moments when the path ahead seemed uncertain, but now, there was clarity. The work wasn't finished. There would always be challenges, always obstacles to overcome. But Grant had proven that with the right mindset, there was no limit to what could be achieved. As we continued to walk down this path, hand in hand, I knew that Grant had found his place. He wasn't just a businessman. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a leader who had found the true meaning of success. And in that, he had built something that would last far beyond himself. In a world full of uncertainty, one thing was for sure. Grant's legacy was already being written, not in the headlines or the bank accounts, but in the lives he had changed and the lives he would continue to change. And as we looked ahead, ready for whatever came next, I knew that Grant was more than ready. The journey was just beginning, but the foundation was solid, and the impact was already profound. Discover the inspiring journey of a man who rebuilt his life from the ground up, transforming not just his company, but also his purpose. This millionaire story is filled with challenges, triumphs, and self-discovery as he rises above past mistakes and finds true success. Through his foundation, he empowers others, helping them avoid the struggles he once faced. With unwavering determination, he shifts from chasing power to focusing on making a lasting impact. This millionaire story is a testament to the power of resilience and the belief that success isn't just about wealth. It's about giving back and creating change. His journey is not only a story of business success, but also of personal growth and leadership. In these millionaire stories, we witness how one man's transformation not only impacts his life, but also the lives of countless others. This millionaire story shows that it's never too late to start over, to rebuild, and to create a legacy that goes beyond financial success. As he finds peace and balance, his life and the lives of those around him change for the better, showing the world that millionaire stories aren't just about money. They are about purpose and meaningful impact.